Welcome, everyone. It is 6 o'clock, so I think we'll get started right here at the top of the hour. I'm Kim Westerman. I am the Communications Director for the Sisters of St. Joseph of Carondelet, based in St. Louis, Missouri. And through that, I'm involved as a coalition member of Nuns Against Gun Violence and a steering committee member. So Nuns Against Gun Violence is a coalition of Catholic sisters and their allies who affirm the value of human life through prayer, education, advocacy, for common sense, evidence-based gun violence prevention. So tonight, this is our third webinar in a series examining gun violence prevention at the state and the local level across the United States. I hope that you will visit our website to find recordings of our webinars on gun violence prevention work in Ohio and Pennsylvania, which has been really excellent. It's really important to highlight these state and local efforts, especially at a time when probably not a lot is going to pass at the federal level in this arena. So tonight, we're examining the state of Missouri, my home state. The Giffords Law Center has ranked Missouri 48th in gun law strength, straight F. But Everytown for Gun Safety ranked us 41st. But they also call us a national failure, so that's not great. We've had a gun-friendly Republican supermajority in place in Missouri for more than 20 years. So we have been having to fight weakening our gun laws rather than being able to strengthen them to keep us safer. And yet, we have tireless advocates across this state who are working every day to try to make Missouri safer. And we're going to hear from some of them tonight, which I'm so excited about. But first, we're going to open in prayer with Sister Marie Fenewald, Sister of the Most Precious Blood from O'Fallon, Missouri.
Thank you for having me. So let's join in prayer. Loving God, you are the author and the sustainer of our lives. You know the anguish of the sorrowful and are attentive to the prayers of the brokenhearted. We join with those suffering in Texas and throughout the world, caught in the violence of the raging floods, fires, and wars. Be near to all those who have been touched by violence, those who have been hurt, lost their loved ones, or their sense of security. We acknowledge the strength of those who have survived violence. Give them the strength to heal. For their sake and ours, we commit ourselves to building each other up and to healing together. Let us remember the families and loved ones of those who have died by gun violence. We acknowledge their pain and their deep grief. They too are part of our community and need our love and help towards healing. We pray for children who live in the fear of a perpetrator entering their lives. Give them the sense of safety and warmth. Soften the hearts and steady the minds of those who do violence. May hate be replaced but with love, violence with peace, and darkness with light. Inspire legislatures to enact reasonable gun control and eliminate assault weapons from public use. Give us courage to seek wholeness in a fractured and divided world, to find reconciliation rather than revenge. May your presence fill us and all others with a thirst for unity, wholeness, and recognition that all people are created in your image. May we be faithful instruments of your love and peace in our world today. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much, Sister Marie.
Welcome.
So tonight, we are excited to welcome a panel of 4 women who are doing great work across our state in a variety of arenas. So we can talk about how coalitions can be formed, how we can work together what our strategies are at the state and the local level. I want to acknowledge just very briefly that I'm so excited about this panel, and we also don't represent the entire breadth of the community who are affected by gun violence. We know that gun violence disproportionately affects people of color, so I do apologize that the panel doesn't necessarily reflect that. But I'm so excited about the panel that we do have, who are fantastic. So we're going to ask each of them to answer a question to kind of talk about their specific lens and their expertise, and then we're going to move into conversation amongst all of us. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, the most fair, even though I'm a W and I understand how that the pain of being at the end of the alphabet. But we're going to start with Dr. Janet Hyde. She is, oh, I lost my notes. She is a professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Go Badgers. And she is also co-missioner for gun violence prevention for the Episcopal Diocese of Missouri and the author of the book, The Psychology of Gun Violence: How Smart Choices Can Save Lives. So Dr. Hyde, as both a psychologist and a gun violence prevention advocate, what are the most important psychological insights we should understand when approaching gun violence prevention?
Okay, thanks, Kim. So I should say, by way of background, I'm wearing multiple hats in this conversation, as you mentioned. I do volunteer with Moms Demand Action and Be Smart. I'm the author of this gun violence book, which you so kindly have mentioned. Uh, I am a volunteer with, oh, my video seems to have disappeared. Can you see me?
Yeah, I think we had a little internet hiccup, maybe.
Yeah, sorry. If I can fix that, we'll hope. At any rate, you can hear my voice.
Yes.
And so I'm also a volunteer with the Episcopal Church, the Episcopal Diocese of Milwaukee, and I'm one of the 3 co-missioners for gun violence prevention. So my particular beat is education, but your question has to do with what we can learn about psychology that will help us prevent gun violence. I could give you a list of 20 ideas. Oh, we'll try the video again. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. And my mouse doesn't want to do that. So I could give you 20 ideas easily about how psychology could contribute to reducing gun violence. I'm going to do just 2 here because I have only 5 minutes. One is that we need to understand the role that emotions play in gun purchases and people keeping guns in their homes. Today, the number one reason why people say they buy firearms is for, quote, protection. That wasn't true 30 or 40 years ago. Before, it used to be hunting and so on, but now it's protection. So if people want guns for protection, it means that they're feeling anxious, they're feeling worried, and they think that the world around them is a dangerous place and that nobody's going to protect them, so they must protect themselves with a gun. Now, the catch here, and this is a massive catch, is that systematic research shows that if you have a gun in your home is actually more dangerous, not less dangerous. Guns in the home actually do not protect. It's far more likely that a gun in your home will end up killing a family member or other person who's in your home, not any kind of burglar or anything like that. So people have been misled into thinking that they're protecting themselves. So if we can get at some of these emotions with gun owners, those who are keeping guns for protection, and help them understand that actually the gun isn't protecting them, it's making their lives more dangerous and the lives of those around them. So that's one idea having to do with emotions. A second one has to do with how we can harness the power of social norms to improve the gun violence situation in our nation. So all of us respond to social norms. And we like to think of ourselves as very independent, but in fact, we're just always non-consciously doing that. I have a silly example. As I've said, I'm a recent immigrant from Wisconsin to Missouri. And in Missouri, women wear bracelets a lot, all the time, really, around the St. Louis area. In Madison, Wisconsin, that doesn't happen. So I didn't used to wear bracelets, but now I wear bracelets a lot, and I'm just conforming to a social norm. It's a silly, silly example, but it just shows how we non-consciously do this kind of thing. I believe that we can think about how to harness social norms to help bring some gun advocates around to having some sensible gun policy, for example, at the state level. And I'm going to tell you about an interesting experiment by some social psychologists. They recruited a sample of gun owners and non-owners. This was on the internet. The questionnaires were given out on the internet. And they asked them whether they favored universal background checks on gun purchases. This is something we should definitely have. So it turns out that 91% of the gun owners favored universal background checks and 93% of the non-owners, but we'll focus on the owners. 91% favored it. They were then asked, what percentage of gun owners do you think favor universal background checks? On average, they said 64%. So they think that that's a controversial issue within their group, their social group that gives them social norms, when in fact they all agree about it. It's one of those things that it's a no-brainer. We need to pass this. Same thing with a ban on assault weapons. 85 to 90% of people favor a ban on assault weapons. It's not controversial. We should be able to get. So what we need to do is help explain to gun owners and other gun rights activists how much of a consensus there is, even among their group with whom they're strongly identified. So there are social norms within their group, and everybody agrees about things like universal background checks and a ban on assault weapons. So I envision things like media campaigns, billboards along the highway, social media campaigns that say, did you know that 90% of gun owners favor universal background checks? So we can get the word out and begin to have people understand what these social norms are. That's enough for me for the moment.
Well, thank you. We'll definitely hear more from you. And hopefully we can figure out the video, while
Yeah.
you're off screen now. So thank you so much. Our next speaker is Jessica Myers. She joins us. She is the Prevention Partnerships Director, wrong person, for the St. Louis MHB. And Jessica, in that role, supports the St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission. There she is. So Jessica, I've known you for a few years. You've been in this role for a while. And I really admire that the St. Louis Area Violence Prevention Commission provides a great model for bringing local partners together in this work. So just from that experience, can you talk a little bit about what strategies have you seen prove to be most effective or promising at the community level in interrupting these cycles of violence?
Absolutely, Kim. It's good to see you again, and it's good to be here. I would start by saying the first thing is collaboration. Whenever we're talking about violence prevention, we always start with a quote from the Prevention Institute that, of course, I don't have in front of me, but it goes something to the effect of the determinants of violence are multiple, complex, and often interrelated. So any successful strategy has to include a wide range of partners and strategies that link with and build upon each other. So that's really the model that we've looked at building at the Violence Prevention Commission. So we cover St. Louis City and St. Louis County. We have about 70 member agencies and 120 to 150 agencies that participate on a regular basis. Because no matter how good a program or an agency is, no single program, no single organization is going to be able to make long-term generational impact on violence. And so I think one of the biggest things that we've learned is that you can't have too big of a table. We always need to keep building that table bigger. So the Violence Prevention Commission has been around for 9 years. We are still getting new members, I would say probably every month, if not more often than that. But some of the other strategies, and one that we have really deeply engaged with, is youth engagement. When the Department of Justice came in, they did a study of St. Louis, and they found that about 40% of non-fatal gun violence victims, so people that are shot but don't die from their injuries, were age 25 and under. A recent study by the National Network for Safe Communities confirmed that region-wide. And so what we know is if we focus on a really relatively narrow age band of, say, 15 to 25, we have the potential to have an impact on about 2 of every 5 shootings in the St. Louis region. And so what does that look like? It looks like being creative. Yes, mentoring helps. Yes, school-based programs help. But what we've consistently heard is that youth feel like they don't have a safe place. Either the spaces in their neighborhood that should be safe, like parks, aren't safe. And the spaces that are safe, there's a barrier. So there may be a fee. There may be a transportation barrier. Or honestly, adults, we are not very good at sharing space with teenagers, so they may not feel welcome. And so one of our strategies has really been to build out safe youth events where kids can come and be young and have fun, often really unstructured, right? You want to throw a party, that's great. We'll give you a grant to throw a party if it's safe and if, you can guarantee security and that kids will have fun. And so, we have really invested in that because we know one of the biggest protective factors for youth is having a relationship with at least one trusted, caring adult. So it doesn't have to be a parent. It can be a rec leader. It can be, a violence interrupter. It can be someone at your local Y. All of those are people that if we build out these fun spaces for youth, they have an opportunity to meet those caring adults that are there to look out for them and to ask them how they're doing and to build that relationship. A couple other things. One is hospital-based violence intervention programs. St. Louis has Life Outside of Violence, which is at 4 local hospitals, 2 adult hospitals and 2 children's hospitals. This is in recognition of the fact that being injured in a shooting is a kind of inflection point that folks have identified as an opportunity to reevaluate and make different choices. So if you are able to get that person into services at that inflection point, to offer them healing, to offer them trauma-informed services, then they're more likely to make other choices in the future and to be safer. One of those tools is cognitive behavioral therapy. That's one of the therapeutic methods that has been shown to be really helpful with people who've experienced a trauma like gun violence, and a lot of our local partners are trained in that. What I will say in closing is one of the big things that we have learned and that we are trying to preach to our partners is that preventing violence and working with the people most at risk of both being a victim and a perpetrator of violence involves doing things differently. That involves relentless engagement. Just because they miss 1 or 2 appointments doesn't mean they don't necessarily want to change their lives. And so you need to be relentless about trying to get people the services. You need to be trauma informed. So if someone comes in and they're carrying a gun, if that means they're going to get kicked out of your services, then you're possibly not the best service provider to be offering services to this high-risk population. And last is it's really 24/7. A lot of our really great nonprofits in the St. Louis area work 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. And for this population that's at highest risk, that schedule doesn't really work. So it's not just about the services that are delivered and the program you're delivering it, but how you're delivering it that determines how successful it will be with people at highest risk for violence.
Thank you. you packed a lot in there. I'm sure we'll hear more about a lot of those strategies in a few minutes. Right now, we're going to welcome our next speaker, State Senator Maggie Nierenberg. Maggie represents Senate District 17 in Clay County, just outside Kansas City. And I know that you've also been a longtime advocate for gun violence prevention through Moms Demand Action before you ran for state office. So I'm excited to hear about your perspective. So as I mentioned, Missouri is ranked 48 out of 50 states for gun violence, gun laws. And we have that long-standing gun-friendly supermajority. So how do you approach this work in the legislature? Are there any realistic paths forward for what we would consider common sense gun laws?
Thanks, Kim, for the question. So as you mentioned, I was a mom's volunteer long before I even considered running for office. My background, I was a high school teacher for 13 years. I'm a teacher, as every teacher today knows, the reality of working with your students and leading them through active shooter trainings and all the things you have to do as a teacher. And that certainly shaped my passion for this work, as well as the fact that I'm a mom of 3. I'm an aunt to 17. I really continue to think about this work in that lens of what are we doing to make sure that all of our kids, every kid in every community across the state of Missouri can grow up in a Missouri that is safe. And I think it really starts by leading with that, about keeping our kids safe with my colleagues. I think as Kim mentioned, no matter where we are on these stats, we are essentially at the very bottom in terms of our gun safety legislation. And quite frankly, we've spent the last, since my time in the legislature, this is year 5 for me again, we have spent a lot of time and a lot of energy fighting bills that are very dangerous. For example, this year we had back really robust debate on stopping the folks from being able to carry concealed weapons on public transportation. Another one that we've really had to fight hard against is the, we call it SAFA 2.0, but essentially, again, another iteration of the Second Amendment Preservation Act, which again, it's something that law enforcement has been adamantly opposed to as another mechanism of making their jobs, or I should say, the reason why is because it really makes their jobs more difficult. And partnering with federal agents to get guns off the street is incredibly important for law enforcement. So thankfully, law enforcement stepped up big time to stop that. In terms of steps forward and what we can do to enact some common sense gun laws, I would say one of the areas where we've had some fairly broad consensus is ensuring that we close the domestic violence gun loophole. And this was created many years ago now, and quite frankly, unintentionally. So in the state of Missouri, you can be someone who has been convicted of domestic violence and still possess a firearm. Now, we heard some stats at the beginning, and I imagine if you were to poll people, nearly all, I think 90 plus, would say if you are convicted of domestic violence, you should not be able to possess a firearm. I think, again, the public is on our side with this. It's just a matter of building consensus within the General Assembly to get this done. There's a few things that do give me hope. And one is that in the state of Missouri, we still have the initiative petition process. And I believe when we go directly to the voters of Missouri and we ask these questions to them, we pose the question directly to the voters, I know voters are on our side. There have been several efforts, most recently a group called Sensible Missouri, to enact a constitutional amendment that would allow local municipalities or local counties to enact their own ordinances surrounding gun possession and transfer. And I think that's a really important approach moving forward, just recognizing how diverse this state is, from our rural areas to suburban to our urban areas. And this is something that I'm very supportive of, is going straight to the voters and allowing voters to decide if we should give control back to our local municipalities. And again, I think voters would be on our side on those two issues.
Thank you. you did a nice job of summing up a few things there's a lot to cover right now. That was a big question. So one last big question for our last panelist is Emily Seid-Schultz. And Emily is part of the St. Margaret of Scotland Parish Gun Sense Committee, which I just think is such a interesting and innovative approach as a parish to have a committee on this. And she was motivated to enter this work after her children survived a school shooting. So we're sorry to share that. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective. And, after experiencing gun violence close to home for your parish and in your neighborhood, your parish developed a powerful and sustained response. So can you tell us a little bit more about what that commitment looks like in action?
Happily. Thank you so much for having me. I've been delighted by so much of the information already shared, and it matches with what our committee has put together. And it's always gratifying to think a lot of us are on the same page. So as you said, my own journey, it sounds like it began when my children became school shooting survivors, but I was already passionate about this topic. And I'm also an educator. So as the prior speaker said, I've been in the drills, I practiced, and I have also lost a former student to gun violence. So the speaker who talked about teens not having safe places to be, it was a textbook example. He was 19 at the time. It was himself and another person that he knew that both had guns on them. And just as our psychology expert as well referenced, it was a split moment without social safety nets where the gun presence was the difference. So it was interesting to see all the alignment about why we're here. And so for my children, obviously, we fit the easy example to build compassion around, right? The easiest thing to trigger compassion, certainly, for instance, among our Republican lawmakers, is, school shootings. And so it's the simple conversational starter. Obviously, it's not a simple journey for our family. But I also say, when I think about the gun sense advocacy group that our church has started, okay, let's start with simple. Let's start with the simplest ways in to conversational spaces where we are not yet. And a lot of the other aspects of my life that have been involved in volunteerism have continually led me to the principle of, we can't move everyone all the way immediately. It is a pragmatic reality about gun violence prevention that is needs to be driving our thinking and our conversation. But if we reframe the question of how many people can we move one step forward, that is how we make the waves and the changes that have been so beautifully articulated by our other panelists. So our community, my children were only 2 from the St. Margaret Parish family who were present the day of that shooting. We're in St. Louis, so it was the Central Visual Performing Arts and Collegiate School shooting where my children were present. We had from St. Margaret some friends of family members who were faculty members at CVPA or students, and we had a number of active parishioner students who were students at Collegiate. So our parish and that school is just like a mile and a half from our parish. So there were many people who found the simple motivation to say, it's time. It's time for me to do something. And one of the things that we have found most effective speaks to, again, what some of the panelists have said, is to think broadly. So we have many things that we try to do, and we sit in peace we're doing the best that we can see to do in a broad number of ways. So some small changes that I think have benefited the parish and much more broadly expanded beyond is, in this every weekend in the petitions, there is always one petition referencing victims of gun violence. It is often wrapped into a petition referencing death or loss, and any other related area. But every single week, death by gun violence is mentioned aloud at St. Margaret of Scotland. We have a basket of gun locks free at the back of the church. Some of these are very low lift things, but they can be high impact, because it just takes one person who hadn't thought about a gun lock before. Some of these things that the panelists are talking about, some small changes, not that many people have a problem with gun locks. They just don't. And so more broad access and familiar. Oh, this is what a gun lock looks like. This is how you use it. This is where you can find them. We have great advocates who've come before us. Police stations and fire stations and libraries are happy to give out loads of gun locks. But as the psychologist, until we remove the social barriers, or should I say, build the social connections to, oh yeah, no, I know what a gun lock looks like. Everyone I know has a gun lock. Those small changes. Some other things that we've done at St. Margaret specifically that I think have helped. A lot of us have been active in moms, but sometimes on small levels, you can feel a little bit like an outsider, which isn't true. You aren't one, but until you get over that first barrier of kind of making a connection or finding your way to a meeting. So we have people that are active at moms, but bring a volunteer who's not quite ready for that one step closer. We also, every month, we have what I would call a lament. We have someone on our committee who has a passion for finding and holding the names and spaces for every single victim of gun violence in the preceding month. And month in and month out, at the end of the month, at the end of masses, we stop and we read the names of everyone who has passed away in St. Louis City and County in the preceding month. And that can be one of those examples that doesn't seem as actionable as visiting Jefferson City, but I think we are finding it's almost equally as important, because it is constantly pulling us back to the why. Again, so I'll end with, for my family, we have the easy why. Well, we're victim, my kids were victims, school shooting survivors. But the why is there every single day. Rare is the month we don't have at least 30 names. It's terrible. It's terrible to read that list. And every single one of those names is a why, and that's enough.
Thank you. Well said. So now I'm going to invite all of our 4 panelists to join me on the screen. You don't have to do anything. It's just going to happen. And we're going to have more of an open conversation with a few questions. But just having heard you all speak so far, I think there will be no problem for this conversation to just flow amongst all of you. So my first question is something I heard from each of you, I think, about, in a state where there is some polarization around this topic, getting at, like, how do we engage people into this movement? So what can help to move people from silence or apathy or just hard-heartedness to this issue to being more open to some of these approaches that you're talking about today? I don't want to call anyone out, so I'll just see who wants to jump in.
Well, since we're talking about religious congregations, one of the things that we've done for the Episcopal Diocese of Missouri is we've taken the Be Smart program that's educational about gun safety. We've taken that to every parish we can get to in the diocese. We do it often for an adult education hour on a Sunday. And so that gets people talking. And one of the nice things about Be Smart is it's really very carefully nonpartisan, non-political, but it gets people talking. And I'll take Be Smart anytime any of you want. I just let me know. We have other people in the diocese, and I know others of you are certified Be Smart presenters. So I think that's one way to get people started talking.
I'll just add, I think, from our perspective, you can talk a lot about violence prevention without having to move the needle on guns. Yes, we know stricter gun laws in general, make people safer, but there's also a lot that we can do with violence prevention that doesn't involve changing state laws on guns. So building partnerships around what healthy communities look like, regardless of what an individual stance on guns are. We have the experience of, having a wide group. So honestly, we're at the table sometimes with police, and at the same table are people that are actively working on the abolition of police. And so it's not about that type of agenda. It's more about finding that common ground and then moving that forward. And so we've found there's a lot of common ground for violence prevention, even if people disagree about certain issues like law enforcement or like gun policy.
And I'll jump in there. One of the things that I've found really interesting, um, in terms of moving the needle specifically with legislators, is bringing law enforcement into the conversation as well. I think it's been really interesting when, for example, and I represent a northern part of Kansas City. And so when my Republican elected sheriff comes in and sits around with other Republicans and shares about stories that have happened, 14-year-olds at a bowling alley on New Year's Eve who are shooting firearms up in the air, and explaining to them that there's nothing he can do about that because in the state of Missouri, they have made that legal. And him explaining that to those lawmakers, I think moves the needle a lot more than me coming in and saying, we cannot have young people carrying guns around in our neighborhoods. And so it's been really interesting is finding those partners. Law enforcement certainly has been one, but everybody is committed to, I can certainly say this, that has been a big sentiment in Jeff City, making sure that we are supporting law enforcement. And how we do that is we support laws that make their jobs easier and keep us all safer.
And just a simple tidbit has been my experience with our Republican lawmakers who might perceive this as much more political, is when I have been in those conversational spaces, treated it very, very neutrally and really led with questions. What do you think? Do you guys use gun locks in your homes? If so, how could you imagine, letting them feel empowered? Because the second that someone who views guns as a political issue feels, we just know the political environment we're in. So the second that they feel challenged, we're done. There's nowhere to go. And so I think that reminder that this is a bigger goal that we have here. So if I have to sit and swallow a lot of difficult emotions while I see if you can voice for me a way that maybe you could see some small measures moving forward, then that's what we need to do. That's what we'll do.
Maggie, I'd love to hear from you as a state legislator, what we can do to support you and whether it makes any sense to introduce a whole flurry of gun regulation legislation into because all we do now is we try to block bad gun bills, right? So I would really love to hear how we could support you personally in your efforts, but also what you think the best way forward is.
Well, first, I want to say I do believe it does matter greatly when folks show up, whether it's moms in their mom shirts. We've had a lot of bills this year, and when those are in committee and all of a sudden the hearing room is full, do you know what happens? Is either those bills don't advance, or we have they help remind us that we are those of us who are working to stop this are on the side of the vast majority of Missourians, right? I always say there's times where I have to surround myself with normalcy, because when you're in an environment where you have a rhetoric of let's push guns everywhere, and it's really important to be reminded, no, we are on the right side of things here. One thing, though, that I do think continues to matter is putting forward common sense gun laws. So I have two that I've still file, is closing the domestic violence loophole, as well as a constitutional amendment that would allow those cities or counties to enact their own ordinances. Following the Super Bowl rally shooting in 2024, there were 38 of us that came together that following week, and we filed at one time, or all of us individually filed, essentially the exact same resolution to do just that, to say, do you know what, Jefferson City doesn't want to listen, so let's allow our local counties or cities to enact their ordinances. And I do think that matters. I think that helped propel folks, whether it is to mobilize individuals to start an initiative petition surrounding one of those. But I honestly think that's probably our most likely path forward, recognizing the supermajority in both the House and the Senate. And then the fact that we have a governor that would either veto legislation that was put forward or would sign a SAPA 2.0 or would sign the guns on buses, all of those things. So I really think it's going to be important to continue to mobilize folks, recognizing that probably the most important tool at our disposal to enact positive change is the initiative petition process.
Maggie, for those who are not from Missouri who are watching, could you talk just briefly about what SAPA is?
Yes, so SAPA is passed, I believe it was 2020 or 2021, the original, and was the Second Amendment Preservation Act, to say that essentially the Second Amendment is above everything else, and federal gun laws in the state of Missouri would not be enforced, for example. So a local law enforcement agent couldn't team up with federal officials, and if they did, you could actually sue a police department for $50,000. One of the things that we used as a message that this is truly the defunding of the police, and it was incredibly dangerous. But what we found out, obviously, and what we had said all along, that is unconstitutional. That obviously federal law is always going to supersede the state law. And one of the things that we found is, we spent a lot of time on it. The courts threw it out. And so this year we had another version, I believe last year too, but a kind of a workaround for that Second Amendment Preservation Act. Thankfully, it did not move forward. And I don't think there's quite the same push as before, but we'll continue to see those things.
Just wanted folks to know what we're up against. Thank you.
Can I go back to some of Emily's comments about the practices in your parish? And because I love the naming of gun violence victims in services. And let me just tell you a little bit about what we've been doing in the Episcopal Diocese of Missouri. In January 2024, we held our first, what we called Service of Lament and Hope. So it was diocesan-wide, and we did it jointly. The Archbishop came, and we had Lutherans and Methodists, and I forget who else. But at any rate, it was an interfaith service in lament for victims of gun violence and hope for the future. We're going to hold that again in September. So I hope that we'll all be in contact for that, because it was very powerful. And I think the interfaith aspect of it made it especially powerful. And hearing our bishop speak and the Archbishop and so on. So I hope we can come back to that again to sort of rouse the faithful that there is hope about these issues, because it's so easy to get discouraged. And I as people of faith, we should have faith that we can make progress. It's sometimes hard to believe that, but it is true.
That's what I kind of wanted to dig in a little bit more is, most of our audience here today are people of faith. I know we've talked a bit about coalition building and the importance of partnerships between organizations. So, how can people of faith join those coalitions? What role do you see for them?
So I will say we have always had faith leaders on our coalition. Going back to the very beginning, our first leadership council had very purposefully 2 faith representatives, because we do know that faith plays a big role. And so anyone in our region can join. Our website is stlareavpc.org. But I think being present at as many tables as possible and making room for faith leaders and people of faith at your table, because for many folks, gun violence is not just a public safety issue or a public health issue. It is very much an issue of faith. And so bringing that to the table and making room for those cross-sector, cross-faith partnerships, I think is really important.
Another thing I'll add is I think sometimes faith communities, we're there for faith, but we're also there for our community. And one of the beautiful things about violence prevention is there are really great programs already established. We also use Be Smart. The St. Margaret of Scotland School has brought on Be Smart, and I have been blown away by the depth and accessibility of the information that they have. Also, obviously, we're all familiar with Moms Demand Action and how well they do. But as I mentioned, a lot of times it's hard to make the first step. It's, a lot of times, even just getting to the point of regular prayer, that's a great first step. But then after that, people hesitate. Life is very full and there are many demands on everyone's time. But if faith communities can say, hey, you know what? We're gonna have a Moms Demand Action representative. We're gonna have somebody in our diocese or our parish or our church community that's gonna do this, and then they're gonna report back to us from time to time. And then maybe over time, a couple more people are gonna join. Or if the people that work in education as well say, you know what, I'd be open to looking into Be Smart and pulling it back to the community. That's part about how the gun sense community at St. Margaret has blossomed so much, is it's been singular people who are willing to say, well, I'll represent us or learn what we need to know about Be Smart or moms or such and such, and then closing the gap behind by, okay, well, all of a sudden there's 4 more people coming along with me because the barrier of feeling unfamiliar or unsure has been removed. The other thing I think I see us running into is people do feel very discouraged in Missouri about the supermajority reality. And so there can be this emotional stunting that feels like, well, what nothing is ever going to actually do that, but it's a false paradigm to perceive that only through legislation are we going to solve this problem. And the reality is, for the most part, it is human movement impact that makes change. If teens have somewhere safe to be and to flourish, it doesn't matter what the laws say. We're going to have solved a huge part of the problem in the first place. So it's that let's make a space inside our faith systems, even if it's just one new space where there wasn't one before, and even if it's just aligning with an organization that's already active. Okay, that's perfect. Let's start there.
And Emily, I think I heard about St. Mary of Scotland, the school, that the parents are doing a pledge about gun safety or something like that. Could you tell us about that? Because I think that's powerful. And I don't think that we can probably get that into the public schools, but I think any private school could do something like that.
Yeah, I was going to see if I could pull it up really quickly because I helped draft the pledge. But Gun Sense, Be Smart held our hands. I mean, they're wonderful, and so they provided verbiage, and we just edited for our particular school community. So yeah, as St. Margaret was bringing on Be Smart and presenting it to families, there was a school-wide question: would you be comfortable signing this, read this pledge over, read this pledge, parents at home. It wasn't sent home with the children, but, read this pledge. Would you be comfortable signing it? And there was a hugely positive response. And if I was going to say, I can see if somebody else wants to go, I'll see if I can find it. And then, and it wasn't, it was well aligned with that concept of let's move everyone a little bit forward, not let's drastically change the meter for all of these parents. And I think that's what helped to get such strong buy-in to say, you know what, I can't agree to these 4 points. I feel comfortable with things. I understand these, and I can sign my name on this content. I was going to say, someone's saying they can email it out.
Yeah, we will be emailing out some resources tomorrow. So if you can share that, we'd be happy to send it to everyone who registered. I wanted to add one quick point about interfaith and Moms Demand Action, and that is that one of the volunteer roles that they have for most chapters is an interfaith lead. So, if there are folks listening to this call tonight who want to get involved or want to connect to that sort of advocacy as a faith community, Moms Demand Action has that resource available. So go to their website and reach out.
Okay, I was able to pull it up, and I can just skim it, but then we can email out the formal version. So it just begins with a little bit of information at the top. How it leads with gun violence as the leading cause of death for children ages 1 to 17 in the United States, and unsecured guns in homes or vehicles pose the greatest risk for unintentional death and injury. Just kind of planted a little bit of fact about, hey, here's why we're doing this. This isn't political. And so using SMART, the acronym that Be Smart uses, this is what we wrote. S for secure all guns and ammunition in your homes and vehicles. M, model responsible behavior around guns We don't shoot off on fireworks. Ask about unsecured guns in homes and vehicles. And I will, again, shout to Be Smart, who gave very approachable and comfortable scripts. A lot of people are like, oh, that's a really good idea. I do want to ask, but I just feel so uncomfortable. And Be Smart has written such simple and approachable ones. Recognize the role of guns in suicide, because I think it's a huge missing piece of understanding how people are missing this huge aspect of this problem. And then T, tell your friends, family members, and neighbors to be smart. Just have these conversations. And if you don't mind, I'll read one more thing. So one of the scripts that Be Smart had used that we pushed out was, hey, before I drop my kid off, I just wanted to check to see if you have any pets, and also see if you have firearms in your house, and just to know how they're stored. I want to make sure he knows your safety rules, right? Like, just roll it into a nice, comfortable conversation about, not do you have guns and where are they? And so I think, again, removing everything that slows people down and makes people pause and makes people think, oh, well, now I'm uncomfortable. I'm not sure where to go next. Let me see if I can find the printed draft to forward out.
One more question that I think is interesting. I think Missouri is reflecting the nation at large in this, is just the divide between urban and rural. I think we have a lot of gun homicide in cities like St. Louis and Kansas City, and increasingly and even Springfield. And our rural communities maybe face more gun suicide, but they also just have a different view of guns, urban versus rural. What would you have to say about that, and how does that reflect, or how do you see that in your work?
I think we see that all the time playing out in the work that we're doing. But one of the things that I like to focus on is that we take a really holistic approach of gun violence.
Mm-hmm.
So we consider, for instance, interpersonal gun violence, like most people think of, to be gun violence. We also consider suicide to be an instance of gun violence. We consider shootings by law enforcement and corrections to be incidents of gun violence. We consider unintentional injuries to be incidents of gun violence. So we have partners at the table that are working on every piece of that. So we have a holistic strategy, and it doesn't just become a microcosm, us versus them. This is an urban St. Louis City problem, not a wider St. Louis County problem.
Well, and also I think the question is also about rural communities, from which, I live in the city. So like, I'm very removed, from rural communities in my daily life. And I work in an urban school setting. But someone had referenced, the conversation about kids, the conversation of keeping kids safe is a very simple place of starting that we all agree on. And many folks in rural areas are themselves responsible gun users or their family members are. And so framing the conversation around rural responsible gun owners it is really true that is a core contingent to guide the conversation. What's working for your family? And sometimes that's just the breakdown of making them feel that we're all in this together, but it's also useful. Why are this, why is your family so comfortable with responsible gun? Most rural folks that I've spoken to would never consider leaving an unlocked gun just in a car, like, oh no, we don't keep our guns like that, and so keeping that space front and center, authentically seeking feedback and advice. Well, how does it work so well in your family? How do you guys create this culture?
Some of that too it's not just a rural urban divide, but it has to do with hunters. Hunting culture has a very strong tradition of safety, gun safety. And actually the NRA did until the 1970s, when they turned much more off the edge. But so hunters have a cultural tradition of gun safety, and they are so different from people who are more recent purchasers of guns for protection. They think that they'll protect them, and they're also those people are the protection purchasers are also the ones who think that they can't lock a gun because they need instant access, right? And so we need to convey to them that there are biometric safes that allow instant access. You can get biometric guns that will prevent anybody but you from owning them. So it's different categories of gun ownership and reason why people have guns.
Well, thank you all for all this sharing. I just wanted to end with some hope. So I wanted to invite each of you to share kind of what keeps you moving forward. You know, what keeps you grounded, and gives you the motivation to not give up.
My retirement project is ending gun violence in America. And, you know, I'm a retired psychology professor, and I want to turn what I know about psychology into helping in that effort. And I try to focus on little successes, you know, like every gun lock that we give away. Maybe that's saving a life. And I also rest a lot in hope. I really, I feel called by God to do this work. And so I just keep going.
Yeah, I will say I cannot stress enough to everyone on this call, self-care, regardless of what you do. I think it is vital. You know, what keeps me going is cooking and baking and reading and having all of those things that I know help myself to feel better. But also just remaining hopeful and never getting too high or too low. Because what we're talking about is generational change. Yes, I want to prevent this weekend's homicide that might happen in the city of St. Louis or St. Louis County. But I also, my big dream is that 10 or 15 years from now, when someone Googles St. Louis, violence isn't one of the first things that pop up. So while we've been making great strides with our violence numbers, if there is a spike, that doesn't mean we're doing something wrong necessarily. It just means that there are always going to be fluctuations, but we keep a hopeful eye to that generational type of change. And that can be our North Star.
I would say when I got into the General Assembly in Missouri, I think I knew what I was stepping into more or less, but I cannot tell you how important it is to continue to surround myself with groups that help fill my cup. And it is groups like moms, right? Visiting and recognizing that I believe that this is the right thing to be doing. I believe that this is the time is now. I look at a lot of even though the laws that we've stopped from being enacted in Missouri, I think we've helped to keep people safe as we've been spreading the message about be smart. We know that this is saving lives. And that's what keeps me grounded in this work and keeps me going. I am, again, I would not be a politician today if I wasn't hopeful, if I was in there just that is my purpose. I really do believe in this and what we are doing, both stopping the really bad stuff, but also recognizing that the pendulum does always swing, that we will come to a spot when we look and we pull Missourians. We know that Missourians are on our side. I think it's very interesting today to start to hear from so much of our business community and law enforcement community recognizing that very soon the World Cup is coming to the state of Missouri. Before we know it, in less than a year, we will have World Cup games happening here in Kansas City, and recognizing, wow, how is the world going to perceive us? when we look at gun violence, this is such a unique issue to this area, and they're doing everything possible to keep us safe. I mean, quite frankly, that's one of the reasons why we haven't passed the guns on public transit, because recognizing that is a really weird thing for the rest of the world to have guns on public transit, right? And so I am hopeful that the tide will start to shift. And when we look at where numbers are in Missouri, I don't care, again, if you're a rural lawmaker, those deaths in your community impact you. The rise of suicide impacts you, and you're trying to recognize that maybe there are a few things that we can do to continue to get the message out to keep all Missourians safer, and that gives me hope.
And for me, I know I said it was the easy example, but my children being in that school shooting was horrific. It was our lives have a before and after, and the repercussions of that day touch us daily. I was almost late today because we were coming from my son's standing therapy session with a therapist that he continues to work with. It's wretched. It's wretched to have a school shooting. And so if I could someday look back and think there's no question that I did everything that I could see to do, then that is a guiding light. But also I like to joke, what is the point of making myself get up every Sunday and go to a faith church if I'm not going to take the gift of hope from it? I might as well just sleep in or go to brunch like other people do. Obviously that's tongue in cheek, but I do feel like what our representative was just talking about, sometimes your place is just to make the soil fertile. And so if that's all that I can be confident that we accomplished in the 2025s, that's okay. That was important and we did it. So we'll take every win, we'll take every step. And if someday no other mom gets the text from her kid that I got on the day of that shooting, then it was all worth it.
Well, thank you all. You're so eloquent, and I really admire your dedication to this cause, and just thank you for taking the time to be with us all tonight. A couple other thank yous as we wrap up here. Thank you to the Sisters of St. Francis in Clinton, Iowa, and the Franciscan Action Network, who are co-sponsors tonight, along with Nuns Against Gun Violence. Just a quick plug, if you'd like to connect with Nuns Against Gun Violence, as I mentioned at the start, we really focus on 3 prongs, which are prayer, education, and advocacy. You can sign up for our mailing list to hear about future actions that we're taking by visiting our website, where you can find out more at nunsagainstgunviolence.org. We also meet as a coalition of people who want to plan these actions, plan webinars, pray together. We meet on first and third Thursdays at noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern. So if you'd like to get involved with that, we have a Google group. So email us at info@nunsagainstgunviolence.org to get added to that list. And also please follow us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Nuns Against Gun Violence. We've also been noting links and resources as our speakers have spoken tonight. So we'll be sharing how to find out more about their organizations and the things that they've mentioned in an email tomorrow-ish. I don't want to promise it's tomorrow. And we'll also share a recording of this, as I mentioned. And I just personally wanted to say that I know it's a pretty overwhelming time in our country to be a person who cares about social justice. And for me, I find a lot of hope in community. So the community represented here tonight in my state, and the community represented by Catholic sisters and their allies is really meaningful. So thank you for showing up. And I think if we all keep showing up and keep showing up for each other, in the end, we're going to prevail. So thank you all. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.